week's COVID-19 Shared Mobility Briefing. My name is Sandra Phillips, and I'm the chair of the COVID-19 Shared Mobility Taskforce, and also the founder and CEO of MoveMe. I'm joined today by Chris Beck Hansen, the founder and CEO of Spare Labs. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Sandra. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me today. Maybe to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do at Spare Labs.
Cool, yeah. So, I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Spare. And we're a company based in Vancouver, Canada. And what we do is our mission is really to help accelerate the shift towards autonomous and efficient mobility by enabling anyone to plan and operate very complex transportation systems. A lot of our current work is in kind of the on-demand transportation space, helping cities and transit agencies embrace this new of way doing on-demand mobility, which they've honestly done for decades. But there's been a lot of recent advancements in technology that has really enabled them to rethink how this is done.
And I think maybe there was recent advancement in technology and then a pandemic that perhaps has also shifted. I've seen that you guys are extremely busy at the moment. So why do you think the pandemic has kind of accelerated, the shift towards microtransit? What are your thoughts on that?
So we don't really see that it has shifted dramatically. It has more just accelerated the trends that we've already seen for a couple of years now, where we're seeing there's the shift from especially the partners that we often partner with, which would be cities and transit agencies, really making the shift from being these more traditional entities to being more what they would call mobility agency, where they would have multiple services within there. And really what COVID-19 has really brought to life is the fact that they need to think differently about how they manage their services and how they operate their services. So we've been really fortunate to be on the journey with many of these entities across the world and in rethinking this.
Mm-hmm. And it's the Canadian Urban Institute has just released a report, right, around how urban planning has shifted, and obviously with that transportation planning more from these massive systems to more of a network of systems. And so maybe, as I said, you guys have been super busy launching services across the globe. Maybe you can highlight one or two where you're part of the big puzzle of transportation options.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up a good piece there. We don't think that what we do is like the end all be all. We really see ourselves as one piece of a very important puzzle. So, there's going to be times where the services that we provide are maybe better saved for another place or another time, right? So we really see these combination of different services really acting up as the best tool going forward. In terms of some of the more recent ones, I would really highlight some of the work that we've done in the US in really redefining how paratransit has been offered, especially throughout this pandemic, but really making a claim to say that we can actually do this in a much better way. And for those who are not really that familiar with paratransit, it's basically transportation for people with disabilities. And it's been a very, very heavily regulated industry for a while, right? It actually just hit 30 years since the American with Disabilities Act, I believe yesterday. So it's been kind of through 3 decades now of really being in place. And there hasn't really been that much innovation in this. And some of the most recent projects have really been in rethinking these systems and bring them up to speed to the more kind of real-time, on-demand basis that we're seeing in so many other mobility services these days, and then using that as a fantastic fundamental piece to offer additional service to the wider general public on beyond that. So one of the places that we did this was actually in Nebraska, in the capital of Nebraska, Lincoln, where we are now helping them power their paratransit service But in addition to that, we can also offer these smaller, more nimble microtransit services that are kind of just pockets of providing transportation options throughout the city that can really help bridge the gap between, the traditional fixed route services that they would provide, and also this paratransit services that they would provide, and really kind of be in this middle layer here, and use this as almost like a dynamic planning tool in order to figure out where does this backbone of fixed route make sense, and where can we put in these pockets of more on-demand services. And not saying that microtransit is the only one that they should be considering, but put in these pockets of additional services that makes the overall system just much more strong.
You bring up, this is a very interesting example, because one of the challenges for public transit is they have to provide transportation equity, right? Unlike, a private mobility provider that sometimes is mandated, but often, unless they're mandated, not necessarily does it. And I think one of the really interesting things, at least from our perspective, is that COVID has kind of, because everybody's demand just dropped off the cliff, it really has shown where the true essential travel patterns are. But it also has shown us that, our transportation systems, even the public transportation systems, are inherently unequal. And I know you guys have done some, at the very beginning of the pandemic, you guys have done some research around this. Are you able to share a bit of insight into what you looked at and why this is so important to look at?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we did actually, as you mentioned, we did a lot of analysis on the data that we had, and obviously, because we were obviously also active pre-COVID and also during COVID and will be after, we have a great data set and understanding kind of how different mobility patterns have changed beyond different geographies, because we operate in many different geographies under many different circumstances to a number of different people that we help serve. So it's really been figuring out of, three different things we looked at. Number one is who is still riding these services, and number two is how resilient are these services versus the broader public transit network that is provided. And then also obviously looking at how have the ridership changed, and also how is recovery done in multiple of these geographies. So one of the keys, there's a great blog post series that we wrote on this, but kind of bringing out the key takeaways is that we found that microtransit is generally much more resilient, being resilient to changes, right? Such as, for example, if one on-demand vehicle can for some reason serve, a specific area this today, then it's easy to bring in another one. So it's fairly resilient to quick dynamic changes. It's a lot harder to kind of bring in and out a traditional fixed route into this type of quickly changing landscape. And then the other piece of takeaway that we got is that, agencies with these on-demand services, they generally recover faster. And we looked on a broad scale of many different on-demand services, not just the ones that we facilitate. And it's much easier for them to kind of rapidly adapt and rapidly iterate, right? Because we really saw the point where they need to change drastic service changes, week to week and even day to day for some of them. So it's been incredible to see kind of how that has unfolded. And then the third one that we looked at is that, during the first wave of COVID, we saw that a fairly bigger proportion of riders were so-called transit-dependent riders, around 45%. And then as time went on, it kind of became back to what we would consider pre-COVID levels of 30% of the riders being transit-dependent, meaning that riders who are not dependent on transit have even right now started getting back into transit. And that's honestly similar to kind of what I've seen here in Vancouver. I frequently use public transit here right now, and I can see that there's more and more of these kind of more and more people getting back to using public transit. Even obviously we're not fully recovered, but it's definitely positive trend in that way.
And that's it. It's very interesting, also because you're bringing up Metro Vancouver, which is obviously also where MoveMe is based, and we ran the Rebuild Tomorrow's Mobility Survey, which is the largest survey done during the pandemic. And one of the really interesting things for me is, when we used to understand why are people choosing the modes they're choosing, it always used to be, speed and convenience and then price, but health in the sense of like, my own health and well-being, not safety of being run over, but my own, never factored in. And it's now 61%. I mean, we closed the survey mid-July, which is not that long ago, right? And it's still one of the concerns. So this is a long preamble to one of my key questions is like, because I do think there's something to be said about, that resilience in the transportation network and adding these more nimble, as you say, microtransit services into it to deal with these concerns and shifts in behavior. How have you seen, or why are people taking maybe microtransit still, but maybe not the biggest bus, the 99B line, which is a lot of people in it?
Yeah, you bring up a great point then. And to the service survey that you guys ran, this also reminds me of a webinar that I attended from UITP and a couple of other interest organizations, where they really looked at kind of on a broader scale, who is taking public transit, who should we expect take public transit, and also to your point of, how important, safety, personal safety has become from a health level, at least, in figuring out who is going to be riding public transit. And they were pretty determined of saying, there will be a portion of the population that we shouldn't think is going to return to regular fixed route anytime soon. And if we want to have a chance of actually being able to still have them as our customers, as our riders, then we need to meet these people with different types of services, being more options for active transportation, additional mobility service, whatever that might be, and so forth and so forth. When it pertains to microtransit specifically, there's a couple of inherent advantages with microtransit that makes it just a little bit easier to deal with in terms of that, especially in kind of communication and making sure that people understand that this is inherently a fairly safe service. First of all, we can digitally restrict how many people come on board at any given time, right? So it's not like a big fixed route BRT system or subway where it's just difficult to know how many people are going to be at any given time. With microtransit, you can make a promise to people saying there will not be more than X amount of people on the vehicle at any given time. And that is something that can be digitally restricted, which is obviously a good thing that people have reacted very well to. The other thing is that it's also a lot easier to clean a small vehicle versus a big vehicle, which makes it makes it just easier to keep things like constantly clean, make sure that we're projecting that fact that this is a very clean service. And those are kind of the big two pieces that makes it maybe a little bit more resilient to some of these other larger mass transit options that we've seen.
So essentially you can ensure physical distancing through digital means, right? Okay, yeah, that
exactly
makes sense. That makes perfect sense.
And to that point, we've also seen some of these tools being used for fixed route too, right? There's been a tremendous increase of transit agencies looking at real-time passenger counting and even to the point where they're looking at, is there tools that they can spin up routes that might they're actually fixed routes, but you have to book a seat on the bus in order to get there. So there's all of these things that they'll be kind of iterated on very quickly to be kind of in the public transit industry at least. And this is honestly a great time to really start thinking about these things, because from it's very rare that we see the world moving in this way. And UITP actually put out a study here here a couple of days ago, looking at basically that this is actually probably the best time in decades to reshape how public transportation works. Looking at how can we, obviously we do expect that ridership will go down and it won't increase as quickly as we believed it would be doing pre-COVID, but all of these other indicators, the acceptance of using digital tools for getting around, this more focus on real-time information, all of this stuff is really, it's really set the stage for really accelerating over the next years, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I hear you. All of a sudden, planning processes that took years and years and more studies and more studies are really more like nimble and let's experiment and see if we can solve it. I do want to touch upon one topic that you didn't speak about, but I actually, there's a trend in the public transit industry, and Cubic, the big provider behind the Compass cards here in Vancouver, has just put a paper out around touchless. And I'm just wondering, obviously everything is technology enabled for microtransit. Does that also solve the touchless problem? The fact that we do not want to touch any readers and card readers anytime soon because you booked the seat? I don't know exactly.
Exactly. I mean, everything happens from a digital tool that you control. It's your tool. It's your phone, or it's your phone to call them, or your phone to book it, right? So from that perspective, everything can be managed from there. So this whole touchless environment fits very well in with. It has already fitted very well in, but obviously now it has a whole different importance.
Yeah. Okay. So you also tick that box essentially, or Microtransit also ticks that box. So I realize we're coming up kind of on our time limit. So I want to get your prediction. Obviously, the pandemic is going to be around for a little while longer, at least until we have a vaccination. So what's the new normal going to look like for transportation systems in our communities?
It kind of goes towards my first point there, is that I don't think it's going to be fundamentally changed from year to year. We're just going to see acceleration of what we've already seen being in trend. But it's important to know that, cities in 2019 look more or less the same as cities in 2020, and they look more or less the same as cities in 2021. So this is really a long-term trend where we're seeing how can we better use urban planning with mobility planning and really use these in a much better way. And we're seeing some great developments in both of these. So really, we don't think that the fabric of society has really changed, but we would expect to see a acceleration of many of these trends that we've seen pre-COVID throughout the next couple of years.
Well, thank you, Chris. This has been wonderful. Thank you for joining the Taskforce and sharing the insights on microtransit. This is great. I wish you all the best. Stay safe and all of that for the next couple of months. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.